for that. And I'm going to start from the beginning, which is last winter. When the hummingbirds migrate, they go to south of the border. They go to Mexico. They'll gather up at the Gulf, and they will fly across in one gigantic group. If you ever get a chance to see it, look up a video or something. It's just fascinating. You've seen the monarchs, I'm sure, that gather on these trees in this one region. Hummingbirds are no different. They gather in one region across the Gulf of Mexico, and they all travel together. They can fly up to 500 miles in one day. So they're very fast, and they're on top of that, they're very smart too. As far as the brain to body size ratio, the hummingbirds are the most intelligent bird we have. As far as the size of their brain compared to the size of their bodies. So and it's very important to know that, because that's what lets them know where to go for the food. So and that's where this talk comes in here. So what they'll do then, and March 27th is the average when the first one is spotted, usually in Williamson County. That's when the first one gets spotted. Shortly after that, between then and April 15th, that's when the ones that left last winter are now returning to their feeding grounds, which is also their breeding grounds. Where we're the breeding area for the ruby-throated hummingbird. And so they remember that. They know where to go. It's uncanny how they know exactly where to go for their food. So what you do, if you don't have them, don't worry about it, because you can get them. If you don't, you can get them rather easily. It's not that difficult. What you do is you have flowers in your yard. Now, a lot of shade plants, you probably already know, will bloom very early in the season, as opposed to a lot of the sun plants. Shade plants like pulmonaria, you've got your bleeding hearts, your columbine. These are all flowers that when they first start to arrive will be in bloom. So it's important to have something that they see that's colorful, bright. They see in the ultraviolet spectrum. Humans don't have that ability. But hummingbirds, butterflies, bees, they all do. What they're looking for is the reflection of the sunlight off the plant. And what they see is different from what we see. We might see just a plain orange flower. They might see a flower that has a very intricate pattern on it, which we can do, but it's more of a science thing. So I'm assuming most of us besides Carl are not scientists here. So it's best just to watch the hummingbirds and see what they like. So that's how I do it, at least. So once you have them in your yard, so that's where the fun happens. First, they look for these flowers. Once they see them, they're attracted to it. Now, if they know if they left your place last year, the very same ones that left will come back to your place. That's where they go, and you can actually see this taking place. If you look up, sometimes you can actually see the scouts coming by. So what happens this time of year is that the ones coming back are going to fly over. They're scouts, basically. That's the word usually used to describe these first ones that come through. It's usually the male hummingbirds first, the strongest, the ones that are the most well-fed, the ones that know all the places to stop to feed on the way here. They'll be the first ones to show up. And so what they do is they'll fly over, they find their feeding grounds. By that time, you should already have a feeder out. Feeder and flowers, because that's important, because once they find the flowers, then they will stick their beaks in every single flower or anything that resembles a flower close to it. So that's why it's important. At the beginning of the season, you can have your feeder out. Late March is a good time because they do start flying over then. Have your feeder out, but you could do something as simple as just having a small container nearby. If they'll see the container and they'll start feeding from it, and then they'll say, this is going to be my territory now. And if it's a female, they'll feed there. If it's a male, the male will claim the spot as their own. Now, I'm sure all of you have seen hummingbirds and how they fight. Some people think they're playing. We know better. We know they're fighting, but we don't tell them. We don't tell them they're not getting along. If it's a female, she will just hang out and feed whenever possible. If it's a male, he claims the territory and says, this is my garden. Nobody else can feed here unless I say so. And that's when the rest of the hummingbirds start passing over, and you can see the females, as they come over, the male will go up, bring the female down and say, look at all this food, be my mate, and you can have all this garden. I will let you feed here. If it's a male, the hummingbird will say, I'm sorry, but this is my garden, you need to go somewhere else. And that's what happens. That's where you see a lot of this fighting take place this time of year. What you can do is to have more than one feeder at that time. You will have one.
I'm sorry, no. Does anybody drive a maroon colored USN tag Honda or Acura SUV? Okay, just want to make sure it was none of you. Sorry to interrupt you guys.
So what you can do in that case, and this is not a bad idea anyway, to have two feeders that are not within view of each other. What can happen is, say you have a feeder here, say you had a feeder hanging right here on a hook, and you had one here, the male hummingbird will find a tree there and watch both of them and say, these are both mine, nobody gets this but me. So what you do is you take one feeder and you put it around the corner. Now if you have the hummingbirds, again, back to their intelligence, they will find a place where they can watch both of them. So the goal is to make it to where you cannot guard both at the same time. In doing that, the next male that flies overhead can go to the other feeder and he will claim that one. And that's kind of how it starts. They hear the commotion, they hear all the chirping, they hear that, and then they're attracted to it as they fly over. So you can develop multiple colonies, and this also goes to where the males say, you can feed here. So you can start multiple colonies, which, by the way, the males can sire as many females as they can find. And so the more feeders you have that are not being guarded, the more colonies you can get. And then when they're there, I don't know have you ever seen the mating ritual with hummingbirds? It's fascinating. Every now and then you could see this. It happens often when you have an established male. The male, and this sounds very bad, the male will knock the female to the ground and then do this U-shaped flying. And what it's doing, it can get up to 60 miles per hour when it gets at that bottom of that. And it's showing her his throat, the red throat, and it's the sound. And so the female sees this and then determines if the female wants to stay or not. And so it sounds bad, but that's just the way it is with hummingbirds. But if the female likes what she sees, she will stay around, and the male will say, build a nest over here, and the female will. Each nest can hold up to 5 hummingbirds. Out of those 5, and I'm sorry to say this, out of those 5, maybe 2 will live. They're very tasty, they're very noisy young, and so they attract squirrels. Everything eats hummingbirds that can catch them, and that's the only time they can catch them. Nothing else is able to capture a hummingbird. It's difficult with a net. Animals have trouble. Cats have a hard time. Of course, don't put your feeder right on the ground. You want it to be at least 3 feet up so that the hummingbird can see around the feeder. That way it's aware of any predators, any threats or anything, but they can get away as long as you have a 3-foot. So just don't put it right on the ground. If you have a shepherd's hook, just make sure it's up at least 3-4 feet or so. As far as plants that attract them, the plants that are fading, the shade plants that have the blooms on them start to fade. Then you need to start looking at the spring plants, which fortunately there's a lot of them you can do. There's a lot of plants that really do well at feeding the hummingbirds. One, for example, I'm going to get this one here, and this is going to be at the top of every list of hummingbird plants, is the lobelia, cardinal flower. There's many different varieties, and at least from what I can tell, they don't seem to care what cultivar it is. Of course, you could get the native one, which is about 5 feet tall. These are about 18 inches tall. There's ones that have burgundy leaves. They don't seem to care about the plant itself, but this is something they see, and they go right to it every time. And that goes to the photography I was telling you about earlier, is that I'm always trying to find plants that bring them to where you can get a good photo of them. And this one does a great job of that. Another thing to realize too is that when they're in Mexico for their winter home, A lot of the plants we call annuals are perennials there. So what they do is they see things that they recognize and they go at it. Now I know you're the Perennial Plant Society, but that's the angle I'm going to use to talk about annuals. It's because they are perennial where they just came from. The cypress vine is a good one if you've never planted that before. If you want hummingbirds, that's one way to almost guaranteed to get them, because that is their food when they go to their winter home. They had just left there. A week later, they're here, and they see something they recognize, they will stop. And if you've never had them before, that's one way you might attract them, is to get something that they recognize. Zinnias are fantastic. They love them. One thing to know is that the flowers, if you get the double bloom zinnias, they can't get their beaks to where the nectar is because there's too many petals in them. So if you do want to get zinnias to feed your hummingbirds, make sure it's a single bloom, not a double bloom or anything more intricate than that. Zinnias are great. The verbena, I got one over here. This is a fantastic one too, and this also gives you a little height also. So if you want to view your hummingbirds, I apologize, this isn't the best specimen here, but if you want to take pictures of your hummingbirds, this one will get them right up to, right up closer to eye level than most plants will. Brazilian verbena, and the Brazilian is where they go. So that's just something to keep in mind. This is a flower for their winter home. Another one that they've always been feeding on, or at least have been feeding for the winter. Again, when they know there's flowers at your place, remember they will come back to your location, to the exact feeder that you have. I want to talk about feeders for a second. Have any questions about flowers, plants, or anything so far? Okay.
What's some things that will grow in the shade?
Shade, pulmonaria is a good one. That's a great one. You can do bleeding hearts. Columbine is a great choice if you have a dry area. Of course, later on, the hostas will bloom. Hummingbirds love hostas. They will bloom. Any blooming plant is okay, pretty much. But the early bloomers are the ones that are going to be the most attractive to them when they first show up. So, just something to keep in mind. Okay, feeders. Now, this is the So Real feeder. I'm a little partial to these. I'll show you why here in a second. First of all, keep this, if you walk away with anything from this, make it this one thing. You gotta clean your feeders every time you change it. Those that have, any of you have feeders? Do you feed them? Okay. You might have seen this when it gets real hot, when you have humidity. Our summers can be very hot. 90 degrees, 70% humidity. That's a recipe for mold. And what can happen is, since you're using sugar water, at least I hope you are, everybody knows by now, I'm not even going to go into detail about the not using dye. We don't need to do that. It's not necessary. 4-to-1 mix, 1 cup of sugar, 4 cups of water. That's all there is to it. You don't need more than that. Which, by the way, that ratio is identical to the amount of sugar and nectar in the wild. So just 4-to-1. Some people will say use 3-to-1. It'll bring more hummingbirds. It's not true. They don't care. They just need the same thing they're getting in the flowers, which does the trick for them. They're not looking for red. They don't care about the color. All they care about is that there's a feeder that has food for them. So. With that said, clean them, because that mold you might see sometimes when you do get that mold, it's this black mold that forms in the nozzles here, and sometimes you'll see it in the basin. That mold, I'm gonna do a little doom and gloom myself here, and I hate saying this, but it's worth mentioning, is that first of all, that mold is 100% fatal to hummingbirds. When the females feed their young, what happens is it swells their tongue up. That's what it does, and they can't feed. But what's even worse is they can't feed their young, and so the parent dies, and so do the young. The young die either because they've been passed on this mold, or that the mother just can't feed the young, and so they starve to death, which is extremely sad. There's been videos out there circulating showing hummingbirds snoring or something like that. Those videos are not the hummingbird snoring. It's dying. It's sick. It's diseased, and that's what can cause it. So just know that. Clean it. Like I said, if you, anything at all, walk away with. Make sure clean your feeders. So important.
How often?
If it's 90 degrees out, every time you change it, and you should change it 3 times a week. It sounds like a lot, but when you get that mold, it's just so important not to have that. One thing, a little bottle brush like this, I don't know if you can see this or not. If you don't have one, get one, because it's hard to clean inside these things, but this makes it very, very easy. You can use a vinegar and water mix, just put your feeder in there. I recommend if you, during the hottest times, to get multiple feeders. I know it sounds like a lot of investment, but you could have one soaking in vinegar and still have one out. It's always, you always want to have one out. You don't want that hummingbird to see there's no food. If its food is gone, it will be mad. It'll get over it in most cases, but nobody wants angry hummingbirds. So that I'm going to go into this too. I'm going to show you a couple things here. Ant modes. Do any of you know what this is? An ant mode. Okay, great. Holds water. You put it on your feeder, like so. Oops, I forgot my hook here. But if you had a hook, you can put your feeder on here, fill it with water. Keeps ants from going into your feeder. They can't swim. And keeps them from going into your... When they get in there, they can die and they'll rot, which will further encourage that sugar to ferment. And bad news, you don't want that for sure. We don't want intoxicated hummingbirds either. We want good, happy ones that are healthy so they can breed and make more hummingbirds. So, this one I like because it's got a built-in ant moat. But the real reason that this variety is what I like, unfortunately we don't sell them here, unfortunately, we're more plant-based than hummingbirds. But the good thing about this, and some of you may appreciate this, is that the whole thing comes apart. Makes it very easy to wash. You can even remove the nozzles here. The whole thing can be disassembled. So that's why I like this. It just gives you a more clean one. If you're soaking it, you can just put the whole thing in a bucket of vinegar water and let it sterilize that way.
You don't use bleach?
No, unless it's a very weak mix. You don't want to, you can probably use a weak mix of bleach, but vinegar is a safe alternative. And I say that because hummingbirds are so sensitive to everything. They're very delicate, even though you wouldn't know by watching them fight. They're very delicate. It doesn't take much to harm one. And that's also part of the reason they might have 5 and then 2 of them may live. Because they're susceptible to so much. Not just other predators, but disease, anything. A lot of things.
So is it just straight white vinegar or is it a vinegar water mix?
It's a vinegar water mix. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a very strong mix. Just enough to sterilize. I'll use a 5-gallon bucket and I'll throw in 1 cup, and it seems to do the trick. At least enough to where I can smell the vinegar, so I assume it's working, but I still wash it on top of that too. Main thing is just preventing that mold from forming, because that's bad news. We don't want to harm our hummingbirds, and I don't think anybody would ever intentionally do that. But unintentionally they might.
How long do you soak it?
I leave it in there for about an hour at least, just to sterilize it. I might be going overboard, but I'm pretty cautious about my hummingbirds. I like to make sure that they stay happy. So I'd rather play it on the safe side, just knowing what can happen if it's not clean. So I wanted to bring that up too. Just clean your feeders. Very important.
I assume you rinse afterwards.
Yes, yeah, rinse it out. What you're doing is you're killing the mold. Because when it's 90 degrees and humid here in Tennessee, there's no way around it. You have sugar water cooking in the sun under glass. It is going to get moldy. It's going to go bad. You'll see little fibers forming in your sugar. If you see that, dump it out. Keep it refrigerated, by the way. You want to make sure it's refrigerated. Other than that, I'm not really sure what else. If you have any questions, I'm happy to help. I might have...
Do you do anything about wasp? Occasionally you'll get wasps.
Unfortunately, no. There are some feeders, like this one they say is wasp-proof, but I still get yellow jackets. So,
That's probably it.
yeah, there's a new one out. If any of you were at the Lawn and Garden Show there's this new feeder that's really getting great reviews. It does. I wish I had brought it. I didn't think about that, but supposedly this one is not only wasp proof, it's also machine washable, and that's a big one. That's a huge thing to have one you could sterilize in a dishwasher. But sterilization, cleaning, all that is so critical to that. So just clean your feeders and tell all your friends to do the same.
Where'd you get that one?
That one I got at the Home Depot in Bellevue, which they're $9.99, so it's not a huge investment either. And yeah, it's a great feeder. Again, you can take them apart completely, and that's a big deal. I've seen feeders that were glass that looked absolutely beautiful, but just these beautiful, fancy, hand-blown feeders. But then I've seen the Hummingbird try to get its beak in there, and its tongue couldn't reach the food. I get that. It's pretty and all, but it doesn't feed your Hummingbird, so why have a feeder that can't feed them?
Do you think that new one might be online?
It is. It's called, I think it's the hummingbirdfeeder.com. When we're done, I'll look it up and I'll make sure you know. It's this very unusual look. It's like a hexagon grid, and every nozzle is raised up off the top. And supposedly bees can't get their tongues down to the nectar, and so they just fly off and they leave it alone. Same with butterflies and wasps. Hummingbirds have no problem with it. So and that one's hitting the ground hard. People are loving this. Good reviews. But we have yet to see this feeder in action during the migration, which that's the next logical thing to talk about. Is once you have your colony of hummingbirds, and each one can do up to 3 clutches a year, which means that you can have up to 15 are going to they're going to lay eggs enough to have 15 hummingbirds. So out of those, 2 might live, or all 5 might live, who knows, anywhere. So up to 15 per hummingbird, or at minimum 6 per hummingbird.
Now, will they share? Because so many times you see them dive bomb.
Yes. Well, sharing is a very, I don't know if that's the right word. They will all fight over the feeder. But if you have enough feeders, I found it's best, and this sounds almost wasteful, but it's really, you're accommodating them by putting multiple feeders out. One thing I've noticed too about the feeders is some people say to cluster them together, which I will do, even though I say separate them this time of year. Later on, you can put them together once they get to the point where they're fighting over food, because no matter what you do, they're going to fight over the food. But they'll all get their nectar for sure. They even though it's not easy for them, they do. So yeah.
Our females fight over them.
Oh yeah, they do. And a lot of times, if you have more than one, you'll see the male sitting by himself on one feeder while all the females fight over the other feeder. It's that's just how they are. But even though they're fighting, they still manage to all get a sip or two. They don't need as much food as we give them, but they like it, so that's why we give them. That's why we give them a whole feeder. If you fill that up, that's enough to feed every hummingbird in the state of Tennessee for a day. Yeah, they don't need that much, but since it's sugar water, it's not a huge investment of other than just a little bit of time, which of course, if you're just boiling water and putting it in a container, it's mostly so it's not a huge investment of money, it's the time, but then the cleaning, but the reward is you can have many hummingbirds as a result of it. That's why we do that. They do pollinate, but they're not known as a great pollinator. We do it for fun because we like seeing it. That's why I do it, at least. I'm sure we all do.
Have you seen any other varieties ever?
There is the Annas. There's an Annas and a Rufus, and I forget which one specifically. Forgive me for that, for not being more prepared on that area. But there's one that goes up to Canada. One of those two, they have a purple throat. If they find a feeder in the winter, they'll stay. It's not very common. Edwin Warner Park has had one in the history since they've been taking notes about this, since they've been actually doing that. If they find a feeder in the winter, they will overwinter here. But then you're obligated to feed them all winter if you want it to stay. But they're beautiful birds. They have both of those have a purple throat instead of red. Other than that, they look identical. So if you see one in the winter, give it some food. It'll stick around. So yeah, and then the migration. Now that's the next thing. Is starting in August, they all start to travel south, and they know all the food stops. They know where the food is. They hear the commotion, because by that time, you have all of these females that you've attracted to your yard. They've all had their babies. They're all fighting over the food, which, by the way, they grow up very fast. They grow up very fast. Their life cycle, or not life cycle, but their egg to fledging cycle is a half of a bluebird, which is 21 days for a bluebird. So you can imagine how quickly they grow up and how quickly they leave the nest. And no sooner do they leave the nest is the mother already laying more eggs for the next ones. So you can get a lot of hummingbirds that way. But what happens when you have all these hummingbirds in your yard, you have a lot of commotion, you have a lot of chattering, a lot of chirping, a lot of fighting, as you mentioned. What will happen is as they start flying south, they can see this commotion. They hear the chirping, they recognize the sounds. They have a very good eyesight, by the way. They can see from, it's like 50 yards or something silly like that. They have very, very good eyesight. They have good nighttime eyesight too. They can see very well in the dark as well. And what will happen is as they come by, they need to feed before they go south, because they can only do 500 miles. So if they're coming from Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, they'll stop here. Now, if they know you have food, they see all this activity, they will feed along with everybody else, and they'll even roost for the night. If it's a good location, if it's a place they want to stay, if they really like it, they can actually come back to your location instead of where they came from, because it's more convenient for them to fly to Tennessee than it is to Michigan. And so you can, what happens is after time, and this was an experiment I did this year, because I want to go all perennials. I'm getting older, I don't want to work as hard in the garden, so I wanted to see if I could still get the hummingbirds with perennial plants, which I found out it's not when it happens. As long as there's a feeder there and they know where that feeder is. I only had one black and blue salvia and one zinnia, and they still showed up. And so that was good news, because now I know I can move forward on doing more perennials next year. Hopefully one day I'll be able to just wake up in March 27th and have, everything already planned. That would be, that's the way to go. So with the migration then, what happens is then they leave in September. That's when they start moving on. They can take temperatures much colder than you think. They can go down to like 40 and they're still okay. Below that, you might see them shivering. They might not be happy. Sometimes they'll stick around a little longer. I've seen one go into November before, which for us is not terribly cold, but for a hummingbird, it sounds like it's pretty cold for them. But they still stuck around. They didn't take off or anything. So, and then that's it. Then the cycle repeats the following year. And what they'll do is when they do come back the following year, sometimes they'll travel with their friends. And if one stops by, their friends will check it out too. So that's, again, why it's important to have that feeder out. If you're on like social networking, a lot of times you'll hear before somebody will say, I saw a hummingbird today. And that's when you put out your feeder. At least that's what I do. I hear from others, and I know to put it out, and I do, and there, that's it. And and that's it. Then they all leave September, and the cycle repeats itself. They go to Arizona, cross the Gulf of Mexico, wait till March the next year, then come back over. So that's it for me. Unless you have more questions, I'm happy to answer anything. Yeah.
What are their nesting habits? Do they prefer shrubs or trees?
They don't care. Anywhere. I've seen the nests on clotheslines before, out in the open. I've seen them in trees and shrubs, everywhere. Yeah, it reminds me a lot of the wrens. If you're familiar with the Carolina wrens, anywhere they can nest, they will. And I think it's the same with the hummingbirds. If they have a good, safe place, they'll just set up a nest there. Thing about them, and this goes with a lot of birds too, not just the hummingbirds, but if they do find they've built a nest in a location they find out is not good, they'll just abandon it and build another one. just like that. They just want a safe place to nest. So they will spend an afternoon building a nest, and then if they don't like the place, they will just abandon it and spend another afternoon building another one somewhere else. So yeah, it doesn't really matter. I think they like dense shrubs. One thing you can tell where the nests are too by watching them. And what you'll see is if you have hummingbirds, you probably have other birds too, cardinals, chickadees. I've seen hummingbirds chasing hawks before. I've seen them chasing cardinals, everything. And that's where you know where their nests are, because if you see, I've seen a chickadee go into a tree and then get chased around the garden by a hummingbird. Just screaming. The poor chickadee didn't know what it did, but that's where you know where the nest is, because like every other bird or every other animal, they're going to protect their young. And hummingbirds are very aggressive, as was brought up before with their fighting. They're very aggressive, not just to other hummingbirds, but to other birds too. And they're not afraid of anything, from what I can tell. So does that answer?
Chris, how long does the sugar mixture stay good in the refrigerator?
I don't know. I try to make as much as I need. I guess it just depends on how many hummingbirds you have. It'll stay good for a long time as long as it's refrigerated. What you're concerned about is it fermenting. You don't want it to ferment. You don't want it to develop mold, of course. You're not going to get either one of those in the refrigerator. But out in the open, of course, yeah, in the sunlight, under the glass, when you're cooking, that's how you make rum. And again, we don't want to intoxicate our hummingbirds.
I mean, might be interesting.
You can find out if you like. Let me know.
And you said that they don't drink very much of the sugar water each time they visit. It's very small amounts of sugar water.
And that's all they need.
Right. Well, I guess what I was going to ask is, do you still fill it up all the way, no matter what?
No.
Okay.
What I do is I watch the feeds. I'll even take a Sharpie and I'll just kind of mark where the food is. And if they eat it all, then I know to put a little more. I just gauge it by the number of hummingbirds that show up here. One thing that can happen if you do attract them and you stay on top of it, after years, you can have a lot of hummingbirds in your garden. You can have a lot. I've been doing this 7 years, and I'll have 30 in a very small area, and they can even. I'll show you something else. When you start to get that many hummingbirds, there's a neat thing you can do if you really want to impress your friends. This is called a button, or a humdinger is what it's called. Here, you can pass that around. That's called a humdinger. You can order those, this one too. What you can do with these, and this is a votive candle holder. What you can do is once you have enough of them and they start competing, you can fill that with sugar water. I put mine in a little votive candle holder. The reason is why is because you can set this next to the feeder. They will know what that looks like eventually, and they'll start getting nectar out of that. In time, you can hand feed your hummingbirds. You can actually pick it up while they're feeding and just hold it like that. They will come to you. Now, I use the votive candle holder here. I use this because that way you don't get sugar water on your hands. And that's the only reason I do it. Plus, it feels good in your hand. It's it's kind of heavy, and so I'll just set that there like that, and you can put this over. Because eventually, one will use it. The others will see that. Again, they're large brains. They see that, and then they will all start feeding from there. After a while, you can just hold it like this and just walk around the yard and feed your hummingbirds by hand, which is kind of neat.
Very cool.
So, is it too late now to put out stuff? Should it wait until next March? Go ahead and put stuff out.
No, it's not late at all. There's stragglers still coming through. And what happens is those that have put out one feeder and two males are competing over it, one of those males is going to have to find somewhere else to go. And they're pretty resourceful when it comes to finding sources of food. So it's not too late at all. You could say that through June. Into June, maybe not towards the end, because by then they're already mating and they're already making babies. But while they're still trying to establish territory, it's never a bad time during that period. So, Anything else? Any questions?
Where did you get that one?
I ordered this on Amazon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the wood brush shop, if you're familiar with that on Bellmead, they sell them sometimes. If you don't feel like ordering online, just give them a call. John, good guy, he'll help you out with that. And if he doesn't have, he probably would order them for you. Just knowing him, how he is, he would probably order from if he didn't have one there. But yeah, a lot of fun because you can actually feed your hummingbirds manually. But the hummingbirds, they don't seem to care who it is either. So I've had children hold into these hummingbirds. And that'll brighten your day. It's also something they will never forget, and that's priceless. You can't put a price tag on that. So, anything else? Any other questions? Okay, well, great. Well, thank you all for coming out. Thank you.